The snow fell silent on Riverside Drive that November night, each flake a witness to what no neighbor would see. Inside the brick house with the cheerful wreath on the door, 9-year-old Grace Bennett pressed her small hands against the cold floor and learned a truth that would shatter her. The most dangerous sound isn't a scream. It's the soft click of a door closing, the careful footsteps of a mother walking away, the lock turning, the silence that means you've been abandoned to your nightmare. But on this frozen night, when Thomas Ward's fists rose again and Grace's mother Miriam shut that door for the last time, something inside Grace broke. Not her spirit, but her willingness to die quietly. With blood on her lips and terror in her heart, she made a choice most children never survive. She fled into the 28-degree darkness, barefoot, believing frozen death was better than one more night in that locked room. What Grace didn't know, what she couldn't know as her small body collapsed in that 28-degree darkness, barefoot, believing frozen death was better than one more night in that locked room. Alley 3 blocks away was that a K-9 named Shadow was about to refuse an order for the first time in his career. That his partner, Officer Marcus Reed, still haunted by the daughter he couldn't save from illness 5 years ago, would hear in Grace's desperate cry the second chance he'd been searching for. That sometimes salvation doesn't come from the people who should protect you. It comes from a dog who won't walk past suffering, and a cop who's learned that keeping promises to broken children is the only way to keep breathing. This is the true story of a child who documented her own torture in a hidden journal because she knew no one was listening. Of a mother whose smile in the doorway destroyed more than fists ever could. Of a stepfather whose charming mask hid a monster the neighborhood never suspected. But more than that, this is the story of the moment the door that was closed gets kicked open, when evidence speaks louder than denial, when a 9-year-old's voice becomes the weapon that destroys her abusers. In the next 20 minutes, you'll witness how a German shepherd's instinct exposed what an entire neighborhood missed, how a hidden journal became courtroom evidence, how a cop's grief transformed into a little girl's salvation, and how sometimes the most carefully hidden suffering cannot stay buried when one person or one dog refuses to look away. Before we begin Grace's journey from that frozen alley to the courtroom where justice would finally speak her name, we want to ask you, what city are you watching from tonight? And have you ever been the person who heard something wrong and chose to act? Or the person who wished someone had acted for you? Drop your city in the comments. Let's build a community of people who refuse to close the door on suffering children. Grace's story begins where most end, in the moment between giving up and holding on, in the space between a mother's betrayal and a stranger's promise, in the seconds before Shadow's bark shattered the silence and changed everything. This is what happened when a door closed, and when heroes kicked it back open. Grace Bennett woke to the sound of her own counting. 1, 2, 3, the hours until Thomas came home. 4, 5, 6, the rules she must not break. Speak only when spoken to. Eat only what's given. Move like a ghost. Never ever cry. The morning light filtered weak and gray through the single window of her locked room, illuminating nothing but the bare mattress on the floor and the bucket in the corner that served as her toilet when he forgot to let her out. She pressed her fingers against the baseboard where the wood had come loose, feeling for the small notebook hidden there. November 12th, she wrote in careful letters. Still here. still waiting. Outside her door, the house stirred with the pretense of normalcy. Thomas Ward stood at the kitchen counter in his flannel shirt and work boots, coffee in hand, looking every bit the decent man he pretended to be. When the mailman waved from the street, Thomas grinned and called out something about the weather. When Mrs. Chen's car wouldn't start 3 houses down, he was there with jumper cables and that easy laugh that made neighbors think, "Now there's a good guy." At the construction site, he was good old Tom. First one there, last to leave, always ready with a joke or a hand. No one suspected that the man who helped frame houses spent his evenings breaking a 9-year-old girl. By evening, Miriam Bennett Ward moved through the kitchen with practiced precision, her hands steady as she arranged plates, her smile ready like a mask she'd learned to wear without thinking. When Thomas's truck rumbled into the driveway, that smile brightened, and Grace, finally released from her room to help with dinner, felt her stomach twist. She carried the forks to the table, hands trembling, and then it happened. The forks slipped, hit the floor. The metallic clatter echoed like a gunshot. Time stopped. Grace's breath caught. Thomas's pale eyes went flat and cold. Miriam's face drained of expression, becoming something blank and terrible. "Clumsy," Thomas said, his voice quiet in that way that meant danger. "Always clumsy." Miriam's hand found Grace's shoulder, fingers tight, steering her toward the hallway. Grace's whisper came out broken. "Mom, please, I didn't mean—" "You need to learn, Grace," Miriam said, her tone as empty as her eyes. "This is for your own good." The door to Grace's room closed. The lock turned. And then Thomas was there, filling the doorframe, and Miriam's footsteps were already retreating down the hall. This time was different. Something had gone wrong at work. Or maybe Miriam had questioned him about money. Or maybe the world had simply disappointed him again. Grace tried to make herself smaller, curling into the corner, but there was nowhere to hide in a room with nothing but a mattress and a bucket. When his fist came, she stopped counting the blows. When his boot connected with her ribs, she tasted blood. "Please," she gasped, "I'll be good, I promise." But outside the door, Miriam's footsteps were already fading, walking away, choosing silence. Hours later, the house finally quieted. Grace lay on the floor, body screaming, spirit barely flickering. But something deeper than pain pulsed in her chest. Survival. Her eyes found the window. Thomas always locked it. Always. Except tonight, drunk and careless, he'd forgotten. Grace pulled herself up, every movement agony, and pushed the window open. Cold November air bit her face. Below, 3 stories down to the alley, was certain injury. Behind her, staying meant certain death. She climbed out into the freezing dark, barefoot, wearing only thin pajamas stained with blood. The house stood silent behind her, its cheerful wreath still hanging on the front door. No one came after her. No one even looked. Grace's feet hit the frozen alley pavement, and she ran, stumbling, gasping, bleeding, until her body could run no more. She collapsed against a brick wall, vision swimming, breath rattling. As darkness closed in, her last thought was not of fear, but of relief. At least I'll die free. 2 in the morning, and Officer Marcus Reed walked the same route he'd walked for 5 years, ever since the night Jasmine died and his marriage died with her. The Riverside district was quiet under the November snow, each street lamp casting pale circles on empty sidewalks. Beside him, Shadow moved with the precision of 6 years' training, ears swiveling, nose working the cold air. This was Marcus's refuge, the predictable rhythm of boots on pavement, the reliable presence of his K9 partner, the illusion that if he kept moving through the dark, the grief couldn't catch him. Mid-block, Shadow stopped cold. His body went rigid, ears snapping forward, and a low whine built in his chest. Then the bark came, sharp, insistent, the distress alert Marcus had heard only twice before, both times when lives hung in the balance. "What is it, boy? Show me." Shadow didn't wait for permission. He lunged toward the alley between the old mill and the empty warehouse, pulling so hard the leash went taut. Marcus followed, flashlight cutting through darkness and falling snow, expecting maybe a wounded animal or a passed-out drunk. What his beam found instead made his stomach drop. A small heap against the brick wall. Pale skin. Blonde hair matted dark with blood. Thin arms curled inward like broken wings. Jesus, she's just a kid. Shadow approached with sudden gentleness, lowering his head to the girl's face, his breath clouding in the frozen air. A soft whine, then a nudge. Checking for life. Her eyelids fluttered. Marcus dropped to his knees. "Don't." Her voice was barely sound, more breath than word. "Don't let him find me." "Sweetheart, I'm Officer Reed." Marcus kept his voice low, steady, the tone he'd use with a frightened animal. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." The word safe made her flinch, as if he'd struck her. Shadow, reading her terror with an instinct beyond training, lay down beside her and pressed his warm body against her freezing frame. Her hand moved without thought, fingers finding his thick fur and gripping like he was the only solid thing left of the world. Marcus keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need EMS to 5th and Riverside, alley behind the old mill. Pediatric emergency. Hypothermia, malnutrition, multiple visible injuries. Advise, this looks like abuse." He turned back to the girl, whose eyes were fixed on Shadow. "What's your name, honey?" "Grace." "Grace, I promise you, you will never go back to whoever did this. Do you understand me? You're safe now. I promise." Her eyes searched his face, desperate to believe but too shattered for trust. Shadow whined softly and licked her hand, and something broke in her. Not more breaking, but the kind that lets light through cracks. For the first time in years, Grace cried. Not from pain, from hope. The ambulance came fast, paramedics spilling out with equipment and urgent voices. They assessed quickly. Hypothermia, severe malnutrition, visible contusions, possible internal trauma. When they tried to separate Shadow from Grace, she panicked, clinging to his fur with both hands, a sound escaping her throat that wasn't quite human. Marcus made the call. Shadow goes with her, non-negotiable. In the ambulance, Grace's hand stayed buried in Shadow's coat while Marcus held her other hand. She whispered, "He'll come for me. Thomas always finds me." "Who's Thomas?" "My stepfather." Marcus's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "Thomas will never touch you again, Grace. That's a promise." At the hospital, Dr. Sarah Vance met them at the ER entrance, her experienced eyes cataloging injuries before anyone spoke. Grace wouldn't release Shadow. The dog had become her tether to consciousness, to believing rescue was real. As nurses wheeled her toward an exam room, Grace looked back, searching for Marcus. "You promised," she said. "You promised I'm safe." "And I keep my promises, Grace, always." As the exam room doors closed, Marcus stood in the hallway, Shadow at his side, and felt the weight of a promise he couldn't break settle into his bones. Somewhere in this city, A man named Thomas was sleeping peacefully, believing he'd gotten away with it. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Detective Chen. "I need you to run a search. Last name Bennett or similar, stepfather named Thomas, address near Riverside. I've got a child here who's been tortured, and I'm gonna make sure the man who did it never sees daylight again." By dawn, Grace lay in a hospital bed with Shadow's head resting on her lap, the dog's steady breathing the only sound she trusted. Dr. Vance had cleaned and bandaged her, but the examination revealed what Marcus had suspected and dreaded. Bruises in every stage of healing. Green, yellow, purple, fresh red. A calendar of cruelty written on a 9-year-old's skin. 3 fractures that had healed wrong because no one had taken her to a doctor. 57 pounds where there should have been 70. Her body told the story her voice had never been allowed to speak. Marcus sat beside her bed, his large frame somehow gentle in the sterile room. "Grace, I need you to tell me what happened. I know it's hard, but I need to know so I can keep my promise." The words came in fragments, each one costing her. Thomas had married her mother 2 years ago after her real father died. At first, he'd been nice. Then came the rules. So many she couldn't remember them all. When she broke them, the locked room, the belt, the days without food, and her mother standing in the doorway, watching with that small, terrible smile, then closing the door and walking away. This last part broke something in Marcus that even Jasmine's death hadn't touched. Dr. Vance left the room, her professional composure crumbling. Grace looked up at him with those ancient eyes. Thomas said if I told, he'd make me disappear, that no one would believe me because Mom would say I was lying. But you're telling me now. Because you promised, and Shadow didn't walk past me, everyone else did, but he stopped. Within an hour, Detective Sarah Chen had a warrant signed. By 6 a.m., Marcus stood on the doorstep of a house that looked like every other house on the block. Neat lawn, cheerful wreath, the perfect camouflage for monsters. Thomas answered in his work clothes, coffee in hand, his face cycling through shock and calculation before landing on rage. "What the hell is this?" "We have a warrant to search these premises. Step aside." Behind Thomas, Miriam appeared in her robe, hair perfect, concern painted on like makeup. "Officers, I don't understand. Has something happened?" Marcus's voice was ice. "Your daughter is in the hospital, Mrs. Ward. I think you understand exactly what's happened." Upstairs, they found Grace's room. Lock on the outside, bare mattress, a bucket in the corner, scratches on the inside of the door where small fingers had clawed for freedom, bloodstains on the wall. Detective Chen photographed everything, her hands shaking. Shadow entered the room and immediately alerted to the baseboard, pawing insistently until Marcus pried the wood loose. Inside, a small notebook, edges worn from desperate handling, Grace's journal. Marcus read aloud, his voice breaking with each entry. January 14th, March 3rd, June 22nd. A meticulous record of torture, documented by a child who understood that her only witness might be the words she left behind. The last entry, 2 days old. "I can't do this anymore. If no one comes to save me, I'll have to save myself." She knew, Marcus said, clutching the notebook. She knew no one was protecting her, so she protected herself the only way she could. Downstairs, Thomas was defiant until Marcus showed him the journal. Then his mask slipped, rage replacing charm. "That little bitch, you'll face every single consequence." Marcus cut him off as handcuffs clicked shut. Miriam sat calmly at the kitchen table, hands folded, still performing composure even as photos of the locked room and journal entries were laid before her. "Children need discipline," she said, her voice empty. Marcus leaned across the table. She weighed 57 pounds. She wrote "Mom, close the door" 47 times. And you did nothing. Her mask cracked, just slightly. I did what I had to do, to keep my family together. You had a daughter, and you chose a monster over her. As Thomas and Miriam sat in separate holding cells, Grace lay in a hospital bed with Shadow's head on her lap, finally sleeping without fear. She didn't know yet that her journal had become the weapon that would destroy her abusers. But she would learn. And when she did, she would understand that her voice had always mattered. It just needed someone to listen. 3 months later, Grace sat in the Miller family's kitchen, nervously picking at the hem of her sweater while ADA Brennan reviewed her testimony one more time. She'd gained weight. Her cheeks had color now. Her arms no longer looked like they might snap. But loud noises still made her flinch, and doors left open were the only doors she trusted. "Grace, you'll have to tell your story to a room full of strangers. Can you do that?" "Will Thomas be there?" "Yes, but he can't hurt you anymore." Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. "Will my mom be there?" "Yes." Tears welled in her eyes. "That's worse than Thomas. He hurt my body. She hurt everything else." Marcus visited every day with Shadow, and Grace told the dog things she couldn't tell anyone else, her face buried in his fur. "I'm scared no one will believe me. What if they think I made it up?" Shadow's steady breathing was her only answer, and somehow it was enough. The Franklin County Courthouse rose like judgment itself, all marble columns and echoing halls. Grace wore a navy dress Trish Miller had picked out, clutching a stuffed dog that looked like Shadow. The gallery was packed, reporters, advocates, strangers who'd read about her case. Thomas sat in an orange jumpsuit, handcuffed, glaring at her with eyes that still tried to find control. Miriam was out on bail, perfectly styled, perfectly composed, her mask still firmly in place. Judge Margaret Hayes, 62 and granite-faced, called the court to order. The defense spoke of overactive imaginations and old-fashioned discipline. Miriam's lawyer painted her as a naive victim of manipulation. Then Ada Brennan stood, holding Grace's journal like scripture. "This is not a notebook about discipline. This is a record of torture, written by a child who documented her own abuse because she knew no one was protecting her. You will hear Grace Bennett's voice, and you will know that every word is true." Dr. Vance testified about injuries in stages of healing, malnutrition severe enough to stunt growth permanently. Detective Chen described the locked room, a prison cell for a 9-year-old. Marcus read from the journal, his voice breaking. "January 14th, Thomas hit me 12 times with the belt. Mom closed the door." Then Grace took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she walked to the witness box, Shadow padding beside her in his service vest. Her hands found his fur immediately, holding on as Brennan asked her gentle questions. Grace's voice was small at first, barely audible, but it grew stronger with each answer. "My mom knew," she said, looking at Miriam for the first time. "She stood in the doorway and watched him hit me. Then she closed the door and walked away." Jurors cried. The gallery whispered. Judge Hayes called for order. When the defense tried to suggest exaggeration, Grace's voice finally broke through with anger. "How do you exaggerate 3 broken bones?" I wrote exactly what happened because I knew people like you wouldn't believe me." The courtroom erupted, but Judge Hayes let it stand. Truth didn't need to be polite. When Grace passed Miriam on her way down, her mother reached out. Grace pulled away. "You closed the door. You chose him. I'll never forgive you for that." The jury deliberated 4 hours. Grace waited with Marcus, Shadow, and the Millers, convinced no one would believe her. But when the verdict came, guilty on all counts, both defendants, she didn't cheer. She simply exhaled, a breath she'd been holding for 2 years. At sentencing, Thomas got 25 years to life. Miriam lost her parental rights forever, 5 years in prison, lifetime on the registry. Judge Hayes's final words rang through the courtroom. "You will live with the knowledge that when your daughter needed you most, you closed the door and walked away." Grace turned to Marcus. "Is it really over?" "It's really over. You're free, Grace." For the first time, she smiled, small, tentative, but real. As they left the courthouse, Grace stopped on the marble steps, closed her eyes, and felt the spring sun on her face. Behind her, the doors closed onto her past. Ahead, the Miller family's car waited to take her home. And beside her, Shadow sat patiently, his warm head pressing against her leg. A reminder that she had been found, she had been heard, and she would never be invisible again. 6 months after the trial, Grace woke to sunlight streaming through yellow walls. Her choice, her color, her room with the door that had no lock. Downstairs, she could hear David's deep laugh and the warm hum of Trisha's voice, sounds that no longer triggered fear, but felt like safety wrapped in ordinary moments. The smell of chocolate chip cookies drifted up the stairs. Morning had become something gentle again. She found Trish at the stove, flour dusting her apron. "Good morning, sweetheart. Pancakes or waffles?" Grace still marveled at being asked to choose. "Pancakes, please." David looked up from his newspaper, smiling. "Sleep okay?" "I dreamed about Shadow. We were playing in the park." Good dreams. Progress measured in small victories. At her weekly therapy session, Dr. Alice Green asked about forgiveness, and Grace's answer came easier now. "I used to think if I was perfect enough, quiet enough, Mom would choose me. But now I know it wasn't about me. She made her choice. It wasn't my fault." The realization had taken months to reach, but here it was. Her mother's failure didn't define her worth. "Do you forgive her?" Grace paused, then shook her head. "No, maybe someday, but not now, and that's okay." "That's very okay. Forgiveness is yours to give or not. It's not required for healing." Saturday brought Marcus and Shadow, the patrol car pulling up as it did every week. Grace raced to the porch and Shadow bounded out. The reunion joyful and tumbling and full of the kind of laughter that came from deep relief. Marcus joined the Millers on the porch while Grace threw a ball for Shadow, her voice ringing clear across the yard. "She's doing really well," David said. "A's and B's this semester." Marcus's voice was thick with pride. "She asked me last week if I'd walk her down the aisle someday, when she gets married." Trish wiped her eyes. "What did you say?" "I said I'd be honored." She said, "Promise?" I said, "Always." She believes in promises now. That's huge. That evening, Grace played piano at the community center. Claire de Lune. Not perfectly, but with heart. The Millers sat in the front row, Marcus and Shadow in the back. As her fingers moved across the keys, she looked up and saw people who had chosen to love her. And the difference between this moment and every performance before was everything. Later, on the porch swing, Grace asked the question that had been building in her chest. "Why did you pick me?" Trish took her hand. "We didn't pick you. Our hearts did. The moment we read about your case, we knew you were supposed to be here. But I'm broken. I have nightmares. I flinch at loud noises. You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference." Grace's tears came fast now. "I love you. Is that okay? I know you're not my real mom, but—" Trish pulled her close. "Grace, I am your real mom. Not because I gave birth to you, but because I choose you every single day. Biology doesn't make a mother. Love does. Choice does. Showing up does." 1 year later, on Grace's 11th birthday, the backyard filled with streamers and balloons and friends from school who knew her as the girl who loved dogs and played piano, not the girl from the news. She blew out candles and made a wish, then whispered it to Shadow. "I wish that every kid who's scared and alone gets their own Shadow. Their own Officer Reed. Their own family that keeps promises." As the sun set, Grace sat between Trish and David on the porch swing, Shadow at her feet, Marcus leaning on the railing. The door behind them stood open, always open now. She thought about the girl she'd been, trapped, voiceless, invisible, and the girl she was, seen, heard, loved. Grace Bennett learned that the door her mother closed was not the only door in the world. She learned that some doors stay open, some promises are kept, and some dogs refuse to walk past a child in need. She learned that survival is not the end of the story. It's the beginning. That her voice mattered, that her truth had power, that she was never, ever disposable. And she learned that family is about who shows up, who keeps promises, who chooses you every single day. Thomas Ward would spend the next 20 years in prison. Miriam Ward had lost her daughter forever. But Grace got her childhood back. Not the one stolen, but a new one. Safe, joyful, home.